Thank you. Thanks very much for the introduction. It's great to follow Louise. That was a really inspirational talk, and I appreciate her perspective. It's great to be with you here this morning. So I've served as state climatologist for 8 years, and I have the privilege of talking to lots of different groups about climate and climate change and what it means for us locally here in Nebraska. So that's what I'm going to give you kind of a high-level view of today, and I'll talk about some climate action efforts that are going on here in Lincoln and across the state. So there is my contact information. Let's see. Here we go. So I'll just do a broad brush view of some climate change facts. This is probably something I don't necessarily need to articulate to you. You all recognize that climate change is real and it's here now. It's not something that we're waiting for to happen. It's impacting our daily lives. Typically through weather events, that's the way in which we feel the implications of climate change, especially here in Nebraska. We live in a really variable climate. We're highly continental, right in the middle of the North American continent. So we get extremes that happen, but they're happening faster. So that's one of the significant ways that we're feeling climate change. The image that you see here, I took it from NOAA. August was the warmest August on record, which followed the warmest July on record. We're breaking records very often. If you turn on the news, usually the top few stories are about an extreme weather event and how that is impacting us. So that's just a spectrum of what we experienced in August. You see a lot of red icons on that map. Heat was definitely the big story. That was the story here locally. My kids are in elementary and middle school, and they didn't go out for recess. It was too hot, or there was smoke in the air that was impacting the air quality. We're adjusting our schedules because of these heat events. The one that impacted the U.S., it covered much of the country, especially in the southern tier of the U.S. So really significant heat that we're experiencing, again, which is a sign of climate change. The impacts of climate change, they are disproportional, right? So for those who life is currently hard, it's going to get even harder. Those that are least responsible for climate change, those communities and people are impacted the greatest. The example that I'm showing here is a story that came out on public radio about the Santee Sioux Nation. So in the corner of northeast Nebraska, right along the Missouri River, is Santee Sioux, the sovereign nation. They are experiencing significant water quality problems, and this stemmed from the flood of 2019. Do you all remember the March flood in 2019? So about 4 years ago, this really significant storm event. We had melting happen really quickly. The ground was frozen and saturated. We had river ice that impacted these communities, so really significant flood event. But that was kind of the start of these water issues that the Santee Sioux Nation is facing. And there are many examples, of course, all over the world about how this disproportionality of climate change, so a really significant issue. What we must do is cut emissions in half by 2030. That's only 7 years away. We must be net zero before 2050. So this is definitely a large task that we must do globally. But I'll talk about what we're doing here locally in Nebraska towards the end of my presentation. One of the things that the scientific community tells us is we must limit the amount of warming to about 1.5 degrees Celsius, so about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't want to warm a global average temperature more than that. If we do, then we will have very significant impacts, possibly irreversible impacts, things that we won't be able to recover from. So what we want to do is follow that lowest curve that you see there. Emissions need to reduce and need to reduce quickly. Otherwise, if we're on this business as usual path, that's the bigger red curve that you see there. Two things with that. For us here in Nebraska, that means temperatures that look more like southern Texas, for example. It also means that we don't stabilize, right? That curve keeps going up. That means our climate is not going to stabilize either, which is again, very significant impacts. Whenever I give a climate change talk, I do like to talk about a hopeful message. And one of the things that you can do, you can practice in your daily life, is talking about climate change, communicating about this topic with your friends, with people in your school, in your community. Talk about how it's impacting you, how it's impacting them, and connect on these common values. So one of the things that illustrates this is back in 2019, there was an article that was published in Politico, and it talked about how farmers in the central US, so the headline here, farmers are waking up to climate change, right? Things like the flood of 2019 happen. It's impacting us. We can't get into our fields to plant. So we're asking these questions among the farm community about, are we going to have these more flood events? Are we going to have more drought? How will climate change play a role in what I produce? An aspect of climate change that we feel is the fact that these extremes are coming at us one after the other, and sometimes we'll go quickly from one end of the spectrum to the other. So here I'm showing an example of the flood of 2019. We had the third wettest year on record in the state of Nebraska, and then the faucet gets turned off, and then we've been in a significant drought pretty much ever since that time. So these extremes and going quickly from one extreme to another is certainly a signature of climate change. So a few comments about Nebraska's future climate, kind of what will it look like? More of our rainfall will fall as heavy rain events. So when we do get a rainy day, we'll likely get more precipitation. So here, an implication of that would be flash flooding. Here is an example from Omaha in August of 2021, and you can see how it's impacting that urban area. If you are a producer, that could mean more erosion in your crop fields. So more extremes in terms of precipitation. Also, more rainfall falling outside of the growing season. So it'll be wetter during the colder time of year and drier during the summertime. Temperatures. Nebraska's average temperature will be roughly 5 degrees warmer in the next few decades than what it is right now. So that puts Lincoln at about southern Oklahoma in terms of an annual average temperature. Summer highs will average about 95 degrees. When the heat is something that we certainly experienced this summer. Impacts that happen elsewhere, we certainly feel them here locally. So think about the smoky days that we had throughout this summer, and we've had them in more recent years as well. So here's a picture from, I think it's from the Scottsbluff newspaper. It's from Alliance. Wildfires that are happening in the western US, across the northern part of the North American continent, that smoke, right, infiltrates in Nebraska. The climate doesn't stop at the border. So we're feeling the implication of a change that is happening elsewhere. There's other examples of this also when it comes to thinking about migration and where is livable places in the world. Well, if people are living in coastal areas and they need to migrate somewhere else because it isn't, they're not able to live in those areas, then Nebraska could become a place where people move into. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of perceptions of climate change and some of the work that is going on here locally. Um, One of the things that I think about a lot is how do people feel about this topic? This image is from the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. And they ask a number of different questions about climate change to try and get at beliefs and how people feel on this topic. Percent of Nebraska adults who think that citizens should be doing more about, they call it global warming, I'm calling it climate change here. But a majority, or 60%, do feel that personally, each individual should be doing more to address climate change. This is something that we've seen shifting over time, whereas more and more people are waking up to it, getting on board, and feeling more personally responsible when it comes to mitigating future climate change. Another thing that's taking place is a climate assessment and impact report was produced by the university in 2014. There was a bill that passed the unicameral last session that provided funding to update this report. This report was not funded by the legislature. It was funded by the university. But last year, there was resources put toward this effort by the Nebraska unicameral. So to me, this is a good sign saying that, yes, we need to keep assessing the state of our climate and be looking at implications. The major utility companies within Nebraska do have decarbonization goals. So these are efforts that they're working toward to thinking about their energy portfolio, working toward net zero. So going off of fossil fuels, thinking critically about renewables, trying to get away from coal and gas and those kinds of resources, but decarbonizing our energy portfolio, which absolutely needs to happen in terms of mitigating future climate change. So here I've got Lincoln Electric System, Omaha Public Power District, and Nebraska Public Power District, NPPD. And then just a couple more items to finish up talking about. So Omaha, City of Omaha, does not currently have a climate action plan locally, but they did receive funds and the city council accepted EPA funding to produce a climate action plan. So that will put into place specific metrics that they can look at. They can look at decarbonization, look at different aspects of the city and tools and resources to help mitigate future climate change. So kind of a roadmap when it comes to how do we act on this, what do we do, what sort of resources need to be put into place. So that's really good news, I think, for the city of Omaha. The city of Lincoln, of course, I should mention, as you all are aware, does have a climate action plan. And then the state of Nebraska as a whole, we have yet to implement a statewide climate action plan. If you look across the country, there are, I'd say, half the states or so that do have climate action plans. Nebraska has been awarded federal dollars, and this is being run by the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, so a state agency that is looking at a comprehensive climate action plan as well as a priority climate action plan. There will be lots of stakeholder engagement, lots of opportunities, in fact, to get involved in this process. So if this is something that you have an interest in terms of the policy side or representing your community, wherever you're from across Nebraska, this is a statewide effort and process. They will also put forth resources to help decarbonize and help put these mitigative actions into place. They're also specifically looking at underserved communities. So I think that's, given this high disproportionality of impacts of climate change, making sure that you have underserved voices and populations that are equally represented at the table, I think is really, really important and a really good step that, that this effort is taking. So to me, this is probably one of the biggest steps that's been taken in Nebraska in my time as state climatologist. So be on the lookout for that news. Be a part of that conversation as you would like. All voices are welcome in this process. And yeah, as my last slide, I just wanted to talk about a point that I brought up in the beginning, and that's that conversations are really critical on this, especially meaningful dialogue on this. There's no greater action that we can take than talking about climate change in a helpful, meaningful way. So I wanted to highlight an effort that was produced by Humanities Nebraska and to bring together these different voices on climate change. So I happened to moderate that event. We had the president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau at the table. We had the agriculture director for the Nature Conservancy. We had a climate and health professional, as well as the mayor of Norfolk. They're doing a lot of great things in the city of Norfolk, looking at renewable energy, downtown revitalization, and other efforts. So it was a great conversation that brought together different perspectives. And so that's a great thing to see, and hopefully these things will continue as we move forward with climate action in Nebraska. So I would just encourage all of you to be on the lookout for these, be a part of it. As an educator at the university, I value and respect all of you sitting here and the voices that you represent. And if one of you and I were to walk into a meeting with, say, the governor, an elected official, your voice is going to resonate differently than mine is. And your voice is very powerful, and please remember that and use that as you would like and as your strengths are going forward. Please make sure that you use your voice, because people, they do hear them. I hear them, and thank you for all the work that you do. I appreciate each of you being here and contributing to this effort. So I will end my comments there. Thanks.